Hi guys, it's Leah. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to my August and September reading wrap up. I love these videos so much, and I know that you guys also really enjoy them, especially when I do from worst to best. Unfortunately, I'm not doing from worst to best in here. I'm going to talk about all of the books I read in August and all of the books I read in September. However, like I said, from the end of October onwards, we are going back to normal with the monthly from worst to best wrap up style. But today, I am really excited. I feel like I've very much been waiting on raving about so many of these books to you guys, because I feel like I've read so many good books, especially in August. August was one of the best reading months I feel like I've had all year, and I'm definitely due gushing about these books. I will say I'm currently a little bit under the weather. You'll probably be able to hear it and see it on my face, but I wanted this video to be quite chill and cozy anyway. So I've got my favorite cup of black tea, my candles are alight. Definitely feel free to also go grab your favorite hot drink, and let's get into all of the books. So August, like I just said, was definitely one of the best reading months that I've had all year, and every single month in my wrap-ups I like seeing what my average star rating is. And for August, which is incredibly reflective of how amazing all of the books were that I read, my average rating was a 4.38 star, which I feel like is insanely high. That genuinely might actually be the highest that I've had all year. We read a lot of good books. I read 7 books in August. This was also my TBR for August. Here are all of the books that I read from it. I can't remember if I did a good job or not. I don't feel like I did reflecting on it. However, like I said, I'm really happy with all the books I read, so I cannot complain. We kicked off August with not only one of my new favorite fantasy books, definitely one of the best books I read in August, but probably one of my favorite books of the entire year, and that was The Second Death of Locke by B.L. Bovalino. I've definitely been reading a lot more fantasy this year than I feel like I really ever have before, and this one, like I said, is one of my favorites. One of the biggest joys in expanding this genre for me this year is I'm really pinpointing what I love in it, and one of those things is definitely Lady Night. I do feel like this year I have really seen a resurgence in Lady Night fantasies, and I am personally eating them up, and this one is definitely my favorite one that I've read so far. Not only did I really enjoy the Lady Night element in this, but simultaneously it is a debut fantasy, but it is so brilliantly written. I think even when it comes down to the atmosphere, it is so medieval, so lyrical. Even when it came down to the magic system, it really felt like a breath of fresh air in the fantasy space currently. We are essentially following our protagonist, has really dedicated her life in being a lady knight for Kia. He is the love interest, and as much as I would say this is friends to lovers, more so than anything, it really feels like soulmates. In this, the magic essentially boils down to wells and mages. They cannot perform magic without the other, and of course Kia and our protagonist Grey have that relationship with one another, and that is kind of all I want to say. I feel like this is a fantasy best going into knowing as little as possible. The writing truly was so astonishing and was so beautiful and so medieval, and I just loved this so much, especially when it did come down to Kia and Grey's relationship. The tension between them was so palpable, but like I said, it is just soulmates. It was one of the most beautiful reads, one of the most beautiful fantasy reads I've read in a really long time, and this was a 5-star. If you couldn't guess already, I would highly recommend it. I really think not only is it one of my favorite fantasy books and one of my favorite books that I've read all year, but one of my favorite fantasy books ever now. I cannot wait to see what this author does next. Then in August, I read a literary fiction book that had been on my radar for a really long time, and that was Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I have always been incredibly interested by Sarah Moss. I know that she is an author that is incredibly beloved, and I just never really reached for anything, and then I heard brilliant things about this, but simultaneously didn't really know what to expect. This is an incredibly unique read. We are essentially following a protagonist who every summer goes on a retreat with her parents. However, this retreat is kind of marketed as experimental archaeology. They are kind of placed in this really remote space, and they have to just kind of survive. They aren't really given any equipment, they just have to survive, and it was just so incredibly interesting. And off the back end of that, the protagonist doesn't really have a good relationship with her parents, especially her dad. Like I said, I went into this not really expecting anything. I didn't know what the plot was at all, and I feel like I did a disservice to myself and to this book by doing that. Whilst I really love Sarah Moss's writing, I think especially her descriptions when it came down to nature were absolutely astonishing. There were definitely moments in this book where I felt like I needed a little bit more depth, and simultaneously I did need a little bit more description when it came down to character arcs and the character development and where the plot was actually heading. There are some really beautiful moments in this, but I would also say there are definitely some really intense moments in this. I can imagine there are definitely content warnings in this that some people probably won't want to read. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was a book that I read at the wrong time, or maybe perhaps it just wasn't a book for me, but I do definitely want to read more from this author. If you've read anything by Sarah Moss before, please let me know which one you think I should read next. It was really beautiful in places, but unfortunately it is quite forgettable to me. I ended up rating this a 3.5 star. My next read, however, in August is probably one of my favorite ones of the entire month. It was The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. I did film all of my thoughts in this in a reading vlog. I feel like I went quite in depth in there, so my thoughts are probably going to be slightly more concise here, but I loved this so much. Going into this, I really didn't know what to expect because I wasn't the biggest fan of One Dark Window. However, I feel like Rachel Gillig's adult works are going to work so much better for me personally. This book was just so phenomenal. It was so whimsical, it was so dreamlike, it was incredibly gothic. I do feel like everyone already knows what this is about, but we are essentially following Sybil, our protagonist, who is a diviner. She can essentially foretell people's futures. She lives in this really gothic kind of cathedral scape with loads of other girls who are also diviners. And as much as at the beginning there is this great found family element where all of the girls are experiencing this life together that isn't at all glamorous, it is actually rather quite restricting in many places. Sybil finds out that the girls are kind of going missing one by one. There is also a really great romance subplot in this. I loved the romance guys, I was literally giggling and kicking my feet the entire time. If you've watched that vlog, you'll know. It was just such a beautiful book. The writing was absolutely astonishing. I loved the character development and all of the character arcs. Again, the found family, not only necessarily through the girls at the beginning, but there is an extra found family element in this, like Bartholomew. Oh my god. Before I went into this, I saw so many people talking about Bartholomew, and I initially, babe, I thought that was the love interest, and I was like, I need to know what people are talking about. No, Bartholomew's the gargoyle. Guys, I'm obsessed with him. I am so excited for this next book, and equally, I'm not gonna lie, rather terrified, but I do feel like I'm probably gonna read everything that Rachel Gillig releases next, which I was never gonna expect. I was not expecting that after One Dark Window, but I adored this. The writing was brilliant. Just the lush gothic descriptions. Actually the most perfect book for autumn. A 4.75, very close to a 5-star. I do very much feel like this could be a 5-star on a reread, but for now, I loved it. You need to read it if you haven't already. On a very different note, the next book that I read in August was I Will Write to Avenge My People by Annie Ernaux. I am slowly but surely on a mission to read everything that Annie Ernaux has ever written. I love her fiction and I love her non-fiction. I think that she endlessly has such interesting critiques and takes on the arts, but especially literature, and this was another example of that. It definitely was not my favorite Annie Ernaux I've ever read. This is tiny. I literally read it, I want to say, in about 10 minutes, and I feel like it is an essay that you can probably find online. However, I am very happy that I still read it. I feel like it is one that is also incredibly necessary at the moment. The way in this that she critiqued literature, but specifically she very much touched upon things like, can you separate the art from the artist? Also very much anti-intellectualism when it comes to things like media, but especially literature. It was all very fascinating and it was definitely interesting. I will definitely say I wish she went a little bit more in depth with this. Obviously I went into it, it's such a tiny essay, so there was only so much she can say concisely. However, I definitely could have read a much longer version, but I'm very happy that I read it, and because it's an essay I didn't want to necessarily rate it, but it is one that I would recommend reading, but you can probably find the essay online. Once more doing an entire 180 from that book, we then had The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Marina Zapata. I adore Marina Zapata. I feel like I can say comfortably with my whole chest now that Or Rosalie Tia is my favourite romance book ever. I think the way that she writes romances are so incredibly beautiful, are so full of depth, but simultaneously are so slow burn. I do feel like there are a lot of romance books that are marketed as a slow burn, but then they'll kiss like 100 pages in, babe. In a Marina Zapata book, they probably won't even touch until about page 500. The Wall of Winnipeg and Me Too specifically was incredibly fun. In this, we are essentially following our protagonist, who for quite a while was the assistant to an incredibly famous footballer, and the entire time that she was his assistant, he never really took notice of her. If anything, the way that he treated her was incredibly standoffish and very rude, so one day she decides to quit. Only then, a couple of years later, they meet again, and he essentially proposes a marriage of convenience. This was also the first romance book that I ever read with that trope. I initially didn't know how I was going to feel about it, if I was going to like it. I'm not going to lie, I kind of ate it up. I really feel like the marriage of convenience plot added so much more tension, because obviously they're isolated together. When they are in such a dire and kind of tension-filled situation, it made the romance and it made them falling in love so much more intense and just so fun. And in spite of that, I think when it comes down to Marina Zapata's romances, despite being so fun and despite being so light-hearted in places, she knows how to perfectly balance more heavier topics and more in-depth conversations, and this was no exception to that. It was a very, very strong, very solid romance, and it was one that was on my TBR, I want to say, for like 3 years. I definitely kicked myself once I had finished it slightly because I hadn't picked it up sooner, but it is one that I would really recommend, and I really want to read another Marina Zapata. This one was the last one on my TBR, which is amazing, but now I don't know which one to go on to. I've obviously read this one, Or Rosalie Tia, and also From Luca with Love, so if you have any good Marina Zapata recommendations for which one you think I should read next after those 3, then please let me know, because I have no idea which one to go on to next. I know that she's got quite an extensive backlist, but I love them. So fun, so full of joy, so full of tension, would highly recommend. I ended up rating this one a 4.25 stars. This next book, I have been patiently waiting to gush on this book, so it makes me so happy that I'm finally here doing that. Not only was this my favourite book that I read in August, but definitely probably probably up there in like my top 5 of the year. It is a 6-star read for me, and it is My Friends by Frederick Buckman. This was one of my book club books, so I do have an entire spoiler-filled reading vlog of me reading this up on my Patreon. Babe, when I tell you I sobbed through the entire book, like especially the last 2 hours of me reading this, tears streaming down my face the entire time. I'm not gonna lie, editing that vlog for my Patreon was equally hilarious and equally heartbreaking because I had to relive me sobbing the entire time, but this book was absolutely phenomenal. I did kind of know going into this that I would like it because I previously read Beartown, I want to say January this year, and I really loved it. His writing is astonishing. But in all honesty, I don't think anything quite could have prepared me for how much I ended up loving this. Like I said, a 5-star, but truly a 6-star read for me. In My Friends, we are essentially following Louisa, who is a young girl. She's just turned 18 and she's been living in the foster care system essentially her entire life. The only friend that she ever had, she also met through the foster care system. Her name was Fish, and at the time of the book starting, she has recently passed away. Throughout Louisa's and Fish's entire relationship and friendship, they were always infatuated with this one painting, and My Friends is essentially what happens when Louisa meets the artist. It is all incredibly unexpected, it is all incredibly spontaneous, and the found family in this, I feel like this is a book that I'm never going to be able to confidently talk about without getting emotional, or at least I'm never ever going to do this book justice in any of my reviews or any way that I talk about it. I truly think that Frederick Buckman has such a way with writing characters and writing real, raw, human emotions and real things that people go through. But he somehow does it in a way where he doesn't hold back at all, but simultaneously will find the light and will find the hope in being human. On top of that too, generally as a writer, he is such a master at his craft. He's definitely quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. I remember so vividly finishing this book and having the experience of feeling so conflicted, not at all in my rating nor kind of questioning how much I enjoyed it or loved it, but rather recognizing that it was such a heartbreaking book and it's such a human and raw book, but it is such a hilarious book. Frederick Buckman is the only writer that I feel like I've ever read a book from where he will make me cry just as much as he makes me laugh, and I love it so much. I love his book so much. I really want to read everything that he's now ever published. But My Friends is such a triumph. It's such an incredible piece of literature, and I think even if you don't read literary fiction, this truly is a book that everyone should read, and I love so much that so many people have adored it this year. Honestly, one of the best 2025 releases that I've read. Yeah, I feel like I could gush about this book forever, and I feel like anything that I ever say about it is never ever going to live up to what this book actually is and the experience that I had reading it, but please read it. It was absolutely incredible, a 6-star read for me. Okay, we're on to the last book that I read in August. I do not own this book, and I listened to it in its entirety through the audiobook, and that was Listen to the Lie by Amy Tintera. This was a thriller book that I'd always seen a lot of people talking about and a lot of people loving, and I will say it was fun. I hadn't read a thriller book for what felt like a really long time, and I was really craving one, so I decided to go for this one, and it definitely scratched that itch. I also feel like this is such an incredible thriller. If you're getting into thrillers or simultaneously you want to read more thrillers, especially at this time of year, it was a lot of fun. It was so good. I will say straight off the bat, I did rate this one a 3.75 star. My entire experience when reading it or listening to it, I kind of expected it to be a 4. Felt incredibly confident in that rating. However, when it came to the ending, I did kind of guess what was happening. Without giving too much away, of course, but simultaneously without giving too much of the synopsis, I do feel like this is such a fun one to go in blind. Our protagonist is incredibly unreliable, and she is questioning the entire time. Throughout the entire book, she is questioning whether she committed the acts that everyone is saying she had. She has no idea if she did. We as the reader have no idea if she did, and I did kind of figure out what happened. And I'm not gonna lie, despite being slightly sad about it because I really wanted to be really shocked by this, it didn't really deter my enjoyment for this book at all. I loved all of the narratives. I loved all of the kind of character explorations and red herrings. It was a really good thriller book, definitely a fast-paced one too. I would really recommend it if you're looking for a thriller this season, and I rated it, of course, a 3.75. On to all of the books that I read in September. September was definitely a less successful reading month than what August was. In September, I read 6 books. Definitely not even in the quantity that I read, but rather the quality of what I read. So these were all of the books that were on my September TBR, and this is what I read of them. And my average star rating for the month of September was a 3.54, which is obviously quite drastically lower than what August was. I definitely feel like I enjoyed a lot of the books that I read in September. However, looking at the ratings of them, it doesn't really reflect that as much, but we definitely had range. We definitely had books that I definitely was really excited about, some 2025 releases. But the first book that I read, I do own. I just have no idea where it's gone. It was Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. If you have ever watched any of my TBR videos for the past couple of months, you would know I was fighting for my life to get this book on one of my TBRs. And honestly, it kind of was a little bit of a waste. I did like this book, however, I'm not gonna lie, I really cannot remember that much of it already. I very much went into it hearing that it was a literary fiction book that I would probably adore. It was kind of strange, weird girl fiction. I love strange literary fiction so much. So when I heard that it also kind of had mixed reviews, off of the bat, I was just considering that because strange fiction definitely isn't for everyone, not everybody likes ambiguous stories nor narratives, maybe that's why it has such mixed reviews. And whilst I do definitely feel like that is the case, I did love a lot of this book, but I just cannot remember. It is such a forgettable one to me, which is so sad. I really like the writing style. I think in this novel there was also a lot of philosophy, especially about sort of existentialism, and also a lot to do with nature, which I really adored. I love reading literature, classics, literary fiction specifically, that include a lot of different philosophies, and this had that. However, I do also simultaneously wish that they kind of went into it a little bit more in depth. Yeah, guys, this was so forgettable for me. I hate not giving an actual review. I always want my reviews to be as concise and as accurate as possible, but because I can barely remember this one, I'm gonna leave it there. I ended up rating that one 3 stars. I don't think it's one that I would recommend necessarily, which is rather sad. Next though, I did read a book that is publishing in November, and that was As Many Souls as Stars by Natasha Siegel. This book comes out on the 6th of November in the UK, and this book was so good. Straight off the bat, I would highly recommend this to you if you love V. Schwab's writing. Specifically, I feel like this is kind of a blend of Bury Our Bones and simultaneously The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but make it witches. I also say that because it is sapphic, it is so incredibly witchy, it is so incredibly gothic, and Natasha Siegel's writing style in this was so phenomenal, but I do feel like this is quite a complicated book to pitch. One other thing that I'm definitely learning with my fantasy exploration is I love books when we are kind of following characters who will love each other in every lifetime, who will find each other in every lifetime, for better or for worse too, especially when they are enemies like this one is. I eat that up. The tension it brings. This was just so good. The yearning was so incredibly palpable, especially when it came down to, I would say, the character arcs of both of the protagonists. And I say both because there kind of is 2 protagonists in this. Similar to the way that Bury Our Bones, it felt like there were 3 protagonists in this. That's why I feel like the comparison is so strong there. The character arcs individually but simultaneously together were so descriptive and so beautiful and so impactful. For a lot of this book, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely got 5-star feelings. However, when it came to the end, I felt like, because there are a lot of timelines in this, and I say this loosely because I do not want to give anything away, in certain ones I felt like a lot of time had passed with very little explanation nor exploration about where they had been. I don't want to say that it necessarily lacked depth, because that's definitely not what I mean, but I definitely would have loved more descriptions when it came to the time passing. For that, I definitely couldn't rate it a 5-star, and I feel like on reflection of the ending, a 4.25 is where I sit best. It is such an incredible read though. Like I said, I think if you're looking for a good sapphic fantasy that is rather reflective of V. Schwab's craft and her atmosphere and her writing, this is such a good one to pick up. I loved my time with this. I definitely would recommend everyone to pick it up in November. It was a very good read, especially I can imagine for the end of the year. Next, we have the book that I feel like is currently taking the entire book community by storm, and that is Catabasis by R.F. Kuang, of course. This was my book club book for September, so again, I do have an entire spoiler-filled reading vlog up on my Patreon with every single thought that I had reading this book. But straight off of the bat, did I like this book? Yeah, I really did. I don't understand a lot of the criticisms that this is getting personally. I feel like this is such a quintessential R.F. Kuang book. I think if you don't like a lot of the subject matters or themes, especially to do with academia and the critique of academia in her books, you're not gonna like this. I really do hope that a lot of people aren't picking this up because they've heard there is a romance subplot in this, because it is a subplot, and I feel like that kind of needs to be emphasized. Do I feel like it is a fun subplot? Absolutely, but it's definitely not the end-all be-all of this story. It is definitely more of a love story rather than a romance, if people are going to pitch it as that. However, when it came down to her writing style, I adore R.F. Kuang's writing style so much. When it came down to the atmosphere, this was such a perfect dark academia trip into hell, I suppose. And I feel like when I read a lot of fantasy books in the past that include ventures into hell, I didn't really like them. I don't know if it's necessarily something that I dislike in the fantasy genre, rather it might just be I struggle to kind of imagine it myself. But I feel like with Catabasis, I perfectly pictured everything, and I really loved the way that R.F. Kuang wrote this. Do I think that there are critiques of it? Absolutely there are. I feel like I would have loved a little bit more depth when it came to the hellscape. At times I definitely forgot what the stakes were. I couldn't really see the tension. I felt like hell needed to be a lot more scarier than it actually was. But I did really like the atmosphere, and I did really like the dark academia-ness. I also think that Alice as a protagonist is incredibly unlikable. But when it came down to her character arcs and her character development, it was incredibly human and raw, and it made a lot lot of sense for why she was the way she was. I definitely don't feel like this is a perfect book, but I feel like a lot of people are critiquing it for that because it is R.F. Kuang, but it is a fun book in places and a really human book, and I rated this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read in September was Mrs. Death and Mrs. Death by Selena Godin. This was quite an unexpected one for me. This one had been on my radar for years. I remember a couple of people and a couple of booktubers talking about it a few years ago. From that, I always had this sparked interest, and this was such a unique read. I think what makes this book so incredibly unique is the narrative style. There is a lot of, I would say, mixed media. It's not quite mixed media, but there is a lot of poetry in this, a lot of interviews in this, and it is incredibly reflective of what you would imagine Death's perspective would be like, and I love that exploration in literature so much, but this did it in a way that I hadn't ever really consumed before. One thing that I really liked about this, of course, is its discussions and its descriptions on mortality and morality, I suppose, and also the philosophies and explorations surrounding individual death and also things like mass death, like a genocide. This spoke a lot of and was definitely incredibly reflective of, unfortunately, our current political climate. It also spoke a lot of climate change, which I really liked. There was a lot of social commentary in this that I think was really necessary and was really powerful, but I feel like it was slightly two-dimensional in its philosophy. That was definitely one of my main gripes with this, and the reason that I couldn't rate it any higher than what I did. I feel like it was very repetitive in places without going too in-depth, which I do think if you're looking for more literature and more fiction that includes philosophies that aren't going to be too complicated, I feel like this is a really good stepping stone into that. I think for me personally, because I always read these books and I'm always looking for more of these books, it needed a little bit more depth, but it is definitely a really powerful and a really necessary read. Also absolutely quite an underrated one. I feel like I never really see anyone talk about it anymore, but it's definitely worth the read. I really liked it. I rated it a 3.5 stars. Okay, we have 2 books left, and the next book that I read in September was Hot for Slayer by Ellie Hazelwood. I was not expecting to read this. I saw that this was published on Kindle Unlimited and I was like, do you know what? Hell yeah. A vampire short story, I'm probably gonna eat it up. And honestly, kind of eat it up I did. I feel like, being truthful, I really would have preferred this if it was an actual novel. I haven't really read any Ellie Hazelwood that leans more paranormal. I've never read Bride. I am definitely intrigued to. So I really didn't know what to expect. Of course, it is a romance short story with a vampire and a vampire slayer. This was really fun. I read it on FaceTime with Daisy and Mela in about half an hour, and it was funny because we were giggling the entire time. We were definitely cringing in places, but it definitely made the reading experience even more fun and even more lighthearted. I really would recommend reading this just if you want a fun time for autumn. I did end up rating it 3 stars. Like I said, I feel like I would have probably preferred it a lot more if it was an actual novel, but simultaneously, personally, I did definitely cringe a lot, but that was what I was reading it for. So it was a 3 star, but it is one that I would recommend. Honestly, I would. And then last but certainly not least, the last book that I read in September, I can't even really give you my in-depth thoughts on because all of my thoughts are coming in my next reading vlog, but it was House of Splinters by Laura Purcell. This initially was on my October TBR, however, because of the reading vlog that I filmed reading this, it fit too perfectly, and it is a video that is coming out early October, so I kind of gave myself the exception of starting it, and all I'm gonna say is that it was an interesting read and it's coming in my next reading vlog. But yeah, those were all of the books that I read in August and September. We definitely had range and we definitely had a lot of good books, especially in August. I'm really happy with how my reading went in the past couple of months, and I'm especially happy to definitely be back with my monthly wrap-ups at the end of October onwards. If you have read any of the books that I mentioned today, please let me know what you thought about them, whether you liked them or you disliked them. What is also your favourite book that you read in September, or what is a book in October that you definitely want to get to? If you watch until the very end of this video and you don't really know what to comment a blue emoji for My Friends by Frederick Buckman, because that's definitely my favourite book that I've read in the past couple of months. As always too, if you did enjoy this video and you are not yet subscribed, it would mean the absolute world to have you here. I am so excited with all of the videos I have coming out in October and onwards for the rest of the year. I'm really proud of them, which makes me really happy, but I would also love for you to be here for them. All of my socials are linked down in the description box below, including my Patreon, where there you can find my book club pick. We have exclusive videos, exclusive content, we do live shows. It's always a lot of fun over there. But of course, we do also have my Instagram, my TikTok, my Goodreads, my Fable, and a whole lot more. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching and for spending some time with me today. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again very soon with another video.